listen. Practice. Speak. Practice makes you perfect.
Okay, so your goal, your professional ambition, isn't just to sit in on those big, important business meetings. You want to lead them, right?
Right.
You want to sound, well, instantly like you're the most clued in, most strategic person there. If that's you, then this deep dive, honestly, it's your accelerated masterclass. We're going to show you how mastering this kind of corporate dialogue really means mastering the art of the structured, metric-driven response. Honestly, it's probably the closest thing to a shortcut to speaking like a true professional.
And the value of these sources, I think, is just how precise they are. Surgically precise, as you said. What they really reveal is that genuine professional dialogue, especially at higher levels, it's highly standardized. It's not random chat.
Right.
We're basically looking at the anatomy of corporate conversation. The exact question and answer sequences you need to initiate action or assess risk or report on success. Understanding this structure, that's the core of mastering business communication.
Right. Structure is key.
Yeah, whether you're discussing, tiny technical details like the exact specs for a system performance benchmark, or you're in high-level governance talks, maybe setting up terms of reference for a joint committee in some new global partnership. It's this structural knowledge, this understanding of the required sequences that really separates just an informed participant from a critical leader, someone who can actually drive the conversation.
Okay, good. So let's unpack this blueprint then. Let's start by really examining the language professionals use when they're launching, developing, executing major initiatives. This is the conversation that kind of creates the future, isn't it? The project kickoff, R&D talks, digital transformation discussions.
Exactly. And starting with that project kickoff, drawn from source one, what's immediately clear is this isn't some loose brainstorming session. It's really more like a firm contract of intent right from the start.
Contract of intent. Okay.
Yeah. The conversation jumps straight into defining success. And it's in absolute time-bound terms. Things like, what are the key 4 objectives? What are the key milestones we need to hit? And crucially, what's the specific 12-week rollout period?
That 12-week time frame, that specificity, it feels important. Why 12 weeks? Is that just an example, or is there something about that kind of precision?
Well, it's a great example of how professionals operate. In these high-level settings, time isn't measured vaguely, like soon or in a few months. It's often measured in quarters or specific sprint durations, like 12 weeks. Using that precise time frame immediately signals operational clarity.
Ah, okay. So it prevents things like scope creep or fuzzy goals.
Exactly. It forces discipline from the outset. And notice how they talk about risk. It's not, oh, we might run into some problems. That's not professional dialogue.
Right, too vague.
Way too vague. The standard expected response has to reference a thorough risk assessment having been done, and the inclusion of specific contingency plans. This is the language of accountability. It basically preempts failure by showing that mitigation, planning for things going wrong, has already been thought through, maybe even budgeted for.
And resource allocation, I imagine, is treated with similar precision, not just, we'll find some people.
Absolutely not. Instead of saying, we'll share people, the phrasing is structured to ensure minimal overlap in how resources are deployed. That phrase, minimal overlap, it shows an understanding of efficiency, of internal cost management.
Right. You're not just allocating resources, you're optimizing them. You're showing you're being careful with the company's investment.
Precisely. And you're demonstrating stewardship. Furthermore, success isn't optional, and it's measured in hard data right from that first kickoff meeting. For this particular example, this $250,000 initial phase, the required metrics are explicitly stated. Things like user adoption rates, system performance benchmarks, specific ones, and the ultimate test, of course, ROI, return on investment. If you can't define your project success with these kinds of quantifiable metrics, well, your conversation just isn't going to carry weight in a serious professional environment.
Okay, that makes sense. So shifting gears slightly, from starting projects to actually innovating on products. Source 18 gives us the product development dialogue. Here it seems the whole conversation is built around justifying why this product should even exist, its market viability, how it beats competitors.
That's right. When they're asked what makes this product different, the professional answer isn't just a list of features. It's a strategic comparison. Something like, our AI integration and user interface are industry-leading. It positions the product competitively.
And interesting how the product features aren't discussed in isolation from the money side.
Never. They're discussed simultaneously. The go-to-market structure is defined immediately. It's a tiered subscription model starting at $99, and it's backed by a planned multi-channel digital campaign. This shows anyone listening that a product development conversation is always fundamentally a revenue conversation. You have to be able to speak the language of engineering and marketing, like in the same sentence.
Right. Okay, so looking bigger picture now, corporate evolution, things like digital transformation, this often feels chaotic from the outside, but the dialogue has to frame it as purely rational, doesn't it? Source 6 seems to lay out some really aggressive targets needed to justify what's usually a massive investment.
Absolutely massive. And you're right, the framing is key. They aren't aiming for vague goals like better efficiency. No. They're aiming for a projected 45% reduction in processing time and 30% cost savings. These numbers are incredibly specific.
Why so specific, do you think? Why 45% and not just around half?
Because that specific number, that 45%, that's the quantified justification the stakeholders need to approve the investment,
Right.
which in this case was mentioned as $2.5 million. That's a lot of money for a process that can be quite disruptive, often painful for the organization.
Yeah.
Without that level of detail, the transformation is just a huge expense line item. With it, it becomes a strategic financial lever, a tool for significant improvement.
But surely, this kind of massive technological change causes internal friction. What about the people involved? How does the professional dialogue handle that human cost?
That's a really important point, and that's where the specific language of internal change management comes in. It has to be addressed. The sources show they explicitly state the need to upskill 60% of our staff. There's a recognition that the transformation fails without the people component.
60%. Again, very specific.
Very specific. But even this is handled with practical language. To ensure business continuity, to calm fears that everything will grind to a halt during the change, they commit to a parallel implementation strategy to minimize disruption.
Okay, parallel implementation. That sounds like key jargon.
It is. It's a vital piece of risk-calming language. It assures stakeholders that the old, reliable system will keep running until the new one is fully proven and stable. It reduces the perceived risk significantly.
Makes sense. Okay, let's move to the really cutting-edge stuff, innovation and R&D. Sources 9 and 23 cover this. When professionals discuss R&D, the focus seems to shift immediately to, frontier technology. Things like quantum computing applications, biotechnology, renewable energy.
Yes, but again, notice the framing. The conversation isn't just about the pure science, however exciting that might be. It's always about strategic advantage.
Always connecting back to the business goal.
Always. The purpose of the R&D funding is explicitly tied to tangible commercial outcomes. The goals aren't just discover something new. They're highly specific, enhancing data processing tenfold, or achieving a competitive advantage that translates directly into a 3-year lead over competitors.
That 3-year lead, that's the quantified value, isn't it? That's what justifies the R&D spend.
Precisely. It allows the executive, the person pitching this, to articulate the strategic barrier they're trying to build against rivals. It makes the abstract concrete.
And that kind of strategic commitment, it must demand a strict timeline. You can't just research forever.
Absolutely not. Source 9 details the R&D team committing to having a working prototype within 8 months. And that's backed by a specific funding request, around $1.2 million in this case. That dialogue transforms what could be a very abstract R&D proposal into a highly accountable, milestone-driven investment pitch. They even project potential market interest, mentioning enterprise clients, and note that early IP assessment is underway.
Wow, okay. Very structured.
Very. Finally, in this section, let's look at operational improvement from Source 28. The professional dialogue here is pure problem solving, but through quantification. The discussion doesn't waste time on generic complaints about things being slow. It immediately identifies specific bottlenecks, things like order processing and inventory management.
And the proposed solutions are equally specific.
Technological and specific. Things like robotic process automation, or RPA, and IoT sensors.
Could you just briefly touch on RPA? What does mentioning that signal in this kind of conversation?
Sure. Mentioning RPA, robotic process automation, is important because it signals a deliberate move away from relying on costly, potentially error-prone human input for repetitive, high-volume tasks. It's a keyword. It tells management you're thinking about scalable digital efficiency, not just tweaking the old manual processes.
Got it. And the outcome?
Immediately quantified, of course. A projected 40% increase in throughput. This whole Q&A sequence, identify bottleneck, propose specific tech, state quantified outcome. It's designed for one thing: achieving measurable efficiency gains quickly. And it's all supported by the calculated cost, around $750,000 here, for the initial tech implementation.
Okay, so we've kind of built the blueprint for planning and projects. Now let's look at the guardrails, the dialogues that govern corporate risk, financial health, long-term expansion. This is where the language gets really high stakes, right? We're talking millions of dollars, mergers, crisis survival.
Definitely high stakes. And when discussing something like global expansion, the strategy has to be precise and targeted. Source 17 shows this clearly. The target markets aren't just vaguely emerging economies. They're specific locations, Vietnam and Indonesia, within the broader Southeast Asia region.
Specificity again.
And the competitive edge has to be clearly articulated. Something like, our AI-driven solutions are unique in these particular markets. You need to state why you can win there.
And the way they plan to enter these markets, it seems quite deliberate. They're not just setting up shop from scratch.
No, that's often too slow or risky. They explicitly choose strategic local partnerships rather than trying a fully organic entry, at least initially. And that decision, that partnership strategy, it immediately helps justify the substantial initial investment commitment, $20 million for the first phase in this example.
20 million, wow.
Yeah. And the goal isn't just growth. It's aiming to capture a specific 15% market share within 3 years. The investment number dictates the scale of the operation, and that targeted market share dictates the acceptable level of risk.
And speaking of risk, going global like that must immediately bring up issues around international trade, right? Source 30 touches on this.
It does, and the professional language here has to acknowledge the complexity up front. You need to show you understand the challenges, noting the need to navigate complex regulatory requirements, for instance. But the critical financial element here is risk mitigation. You can't just hope for the best with currency fluctuations.
So what do?
They detail a specific plan to implement hedging strategies to minimize exposure to currency risks.
Okay, hedging strategies. For our listener, why is using that specific term so important in this kind of dialogue? Is it just jargon?
It's more than just jargon. Using the term hedging strategies signals that the company isn't just passively accepting currency risk. It shows they're actively managing it. They're using sophisticated financial instruments, things like futures contracts or currency options to protect themselves. It demonstrates financial maturity and a responsible approach to international volatility. It tells stakeholders the financial leadership is on top of things.
Got it. Financial maturity. Okay, moving to pure financial planning, source 20. This seems like the heartland of metrics, where every number is a non-negotiable benchmark.
Absolutely. They're projecting targets that are aggressive but seem controlled. For example, 15% annual growth, and setting a goal for gross margins to improve to 45% by year 3. Very specific aspirations.
And how do they talk about stability? Because rapid growth can sometimes be unstable.
Right. They address that directly through debt management. The dialogue specifies maintaining a conservative 2.5 debt-to-equity ratio.
2.5 debt to equity. Can you briefly unpack that ratio for us?
Sure. It's basically a measure of how much debt a company is using to finance its assets relative to the value of shareholders' equity. A ratio of 2.5, while context-dependent, often signals they prioritize stability and solvency. They're communicating to analysts, to investors, that they're not going to over-leverage the company just for growth's sake. It's really a statement of financial philosophy embedded in that number.
The financial philosophy in a ratio. Interesting. And Source 20 also mentions they don't just present a perfect plan, right? They acknowledge uncertainty.
Critically important. They explicitly integrate tools like sensitivity analyses for key variables. This means they've tested the plan. They've looked at what happens if key assumptions, say, interest rates or market demand change. The professional dialogue doesn't just present the plan. It presents the plan's potential vulnerabilities and shows they've already stress tested it.
That builds confidence.
Exactly. Which brings us neatly to M&A dialogue, mergers and acquisitions, source 15. Perhaps the highest stakes conversation we've looked at. The language here is extremely structured. It almost has to follow a mandated sequence.
What's that sequence look like?
It typically starts with the objective data referencing the due diligence report. Then the agreed valuation, $450 million in this example. And the strategic benefit has to be defined immediately and compellingly. The deal is to expand our AI capabilities and market presence in Asia, for instance.
But here's something I found really interesting. While the deal is clearly driven by those hard numbers, the source material shows they spend significant time on, well, the non-technical integration challenges. They flag things like cultural alignment and tech stack compatibility as immediate high-priority hurdles. Why bring up these softer issues right alongside the huge valuation number?
Because frankly, history is absolutely littered with mergers that looked great on paper, financially perfect, but failed miserably because the cultures clashed. Or the technology systems couldn't actually be integrated effectively, leading to massive employee turnover or huge integration delays and costs.
Okay. So it's preempting common failure points.
Precisely. Raising cultural alignment and tech stack compatibility upfront signals that the management team understands a successful acquisition is maybe 70% about people and process integration, and only 30% about the initial financial transaction. And furthermore, they don't just flag the issue, they quantify the required outcome. They project a clear, time-bound ROI, stating the deal is expected to be breaking even within 3 years post-acquisition. That level of detail transforms what could look like a massive multi-million-dollar gamble into a measured, albeit still risky, corporate investment.
Okay, let's shift to when things go wrong. Mitigating critical risk. A crisis management call, source 4. This must be all about damage control and clear updates.
Entirely. The language has to be calm, declarative, and immediate. No waffle. And the very first piece of information shared. It needs to be about the current status and the scale of the impact.
So facts first.
Facts first, quantified, for example. We've restored 80% functionality. The quantified impact. Disruptions affecting 3,000 enterprise clients. This immediate quantification serves a really specific psychological and professional function. It shows stakeholders the crisis is being contained, it's measurable, it prevents widespread panic based on rumor.
And the next steps?
Purely action-based. We have activated backup servers. We have notified affected clients. The dialogue has to be entirely focused on mitigation and containment. There's absolutely no room for speculation or blame at this stage.
Right. Get control first. Okay, moving to prevention then. The cybersecurity dialogue in Source 16, this seems focused on identifying specific weaknesses.
Yes, things like legacy systems, older systems that are harder to protect, and weak points in encryption, and then proposing advanced specific solutions. A key one mentioned is implementing a zero-trust architecture.
Zero trust architecture. That sounds serious. What does that term signal?
It signals a fundamental shift in security thinking. It moves away from the old castle and moat idea where if you're inside the company network, you're trusted. In a zero-trust model, no one is trusted by default. Every user, every device, whether inside or outside the network, has to be verified continuously before getting access to resources. Mentioning this term in a professional dialogue signals the company's adopting modern, best practice security protocols. It helps justify the necessary investment, around $800,000 for implementation in this source.
And it's not just tech, is it? There's a human element too.
Absolutely critical. The plan mandates a behavioral change, mandatory cybersecurity awareness sessions for all staff.
Yep.
Technology alone isn't enough.
Makes sense. Finally, there's the broader risk management review, Source 27. This seems to connect different kinds of threats.
Yeah, it looks beyond just cyber threats. It considers physical risks, too, like supply chain disruption. It takes a more holistic view.
So a cross-functional perspective is needed, vital. And the proposed mitigation is equally cross-functional. It combines technical fixes, like enhanced encryption, with logistical solutions, maybe blockchain tracking for better supply chain transparency. And the conversation culminates, as always seems to be the case, with the total commitment required for this robust protection. A detailed cost breakdown for the complete mitigation package, totaling $3.5 million here.
$3.5 million.
It just reinforces that core message we're seeing across all these sources. Every single significant risk needs to be identified, quantified, and then assigned a specific, measurable financial solution or mitigation cost. That's the language of professional risk management.
Okay, so we've covered the hard metrics of strategy and finance. Now let's pivot a bit to the human capital side. How do professionals manage staff, clients, partners, and the overall corporate culture? This feels like maybe more of an art, balancing that hard data with human leadership. It definitely requires finesse, but you'll see the structure and metrics are still very much present. Take the performance review, Source 3. It's a prime example of structured communication, even one-on-one. It's not just a casual chat about feelings or how hard someone worked. It immediately references hard metrics.
Like what?
Like, your team's productivity has increased by 35% year over year. That specific metric anchors the entire discussion, lifting it beyond just subjective opinion.
Okay, so data even in performance reviews. And does it connect past performance to future plans?
Directly. The conversation structure typically details successful past initiatives, the person led, maybe implementing mentoring programs, and then pivots to a specific high-value future goal. Something like leading the upcoming APAC expansion project. The professional performance review dialogue is really a developmental trajectory. It ensures individual growth is directly leveraged to achieve broader company objectives.
Got it. What about wider HR issues? Source 10 reflects the modern workplace challenge of employees wanting more flexibility. How is that handled professionally?
Well, the response needs to be measured and very focused on accountability. You can't just say yes without structure. It balances the demand for flexibility by stating clearly, okay, but we will also implement performance metrics and regular check-ins.
So it's a strategic trade-off.
Exactly. It's a perfect example of strategic communication. Management is addressing the employee desire for flexibility, but they're strictly maintaining accountability using specific control language like metrics and check-ins. And then, to make the policy more palatable, maybe more positive, they offer a tangible supportive benefit, something like a stipend program for home office setup. So the dialogue becomes a tactical exchange. Flexibility granted, but in return for explicit performance measurement and support.
Clever. What about investing in employee wellness? Source 19 talks about this. Are these just nice-to-have perks?
Not anymore. Not in forward-thinking companies. Modern wellness programs are presented as sophisticated and strategically justified initiatives. They often include things like mental health support, fitness programs, and dedicated work-life balance coaching.
But again, the justification has to be there, right? It can't just be about feeling good.
Absolutely. What's critical here, just like every other investment we've discussed, is the justification. The investment, maybe $500 annually per employee in this example, isn't framed as a simple expense or perk. It's positioned as a calculated business move, justified by a measurable return, a projected 20% improvement in employee engagement scores. So once again, even something seemingly qualitative like corporate culture or wellness gets quantified and tied directly back to operational success metrics.
Okay, always back to the numbers. What about getting new talent? Talent acquisition, source 26. The language must reflect urgency here, especially for certain roles.
Definitely. The dialogue immediately prioritizes those hard-to-find, high-demand roles like data scientists and cloud architects. And it specifies the use of high-tech, efficient sourcing methods, leveraging AI-powered platforms and engaging specialized headhunters. It signals a serious, modern approach.
And is it just about getting them in the door, or does the conversation cover keeping them?
Retention is treated with the same strategic weight as acquisition in these dialogues. You can't afford to lose expensive talent quickly. So the dialogue explicitly demands a comprehensive onboarding and mentoring program. Discussing this investment signals to everyone involved that the focus is on long-term human capital stability, not just hitting short-term hiring quotas.
Right. Protecting the investment. And when a whole company is changing, maybe restructuring, the change management dialogue in Source 31 must be crucial.
Crucial and heavily reliant on the language of transparency and measurement. The communication strategy have to emphasize transparent communication and involve things like regular town halls. People need to feel informed. And crucially, the success of the change isn't just judged anecdotally after the fact. Over the planned 12-month transformation period, success is measured using hard data, employee engagement scores, and productivity indicators.
Okay, let's shift outside the company now to external stakeholders. Client negotiation, source 2. This must require extreme diplomatic precision.
Absolutely. When you're addressing client concerns, maybe they're pushing back on price or terms, you need specific professional phrasing. A key phrase is something like, I understand your concerns, and we can offer some flexibility there. You validate their position first, then immediately signal openness to finding a solution.
And the solution itself, it can't just be vague promises.
No, the professional world solves negotiation problems, not just with words, but often with financial restructuring or tangible offers. So they might offer a milestone-based payment plan as a concrete alternative to a large upfront cost. That addresses cash flow concerns. And alongside that, maybe a clear commitment regarding intellectual property, like transferring full IP rights upon final payment. The dialogue is this careful balancing act, showing empathy, offering financial agility, but also making clear legal commitments.
Okay, what about the broader customer experience? Source 14, how do professionals talk about improving that?
The conversation is very focused on identifying and removing specific friction areas in the customer journey. Things they know cause frustration, like maybe the onboarding process is too complex or technical support wait times are too long.
And the solutions proposed?
Usually technological and measurable. For instance, implementing AI chatbots specifically to target a 60% reduction in average wait times. Again, a specific tool for a specific quantified improvement.
And how do they track if it actually worked?
Through universally accepted, ideally external, metrics. Things like NPS scores, Net Promoter Scores, and customer retention rates. Using NPS is key here because it's a widely recognized industry standard for measuring customer loyalty and satisfaction. Mentioning it shows you're serious about CX and using benchmarkable data.
Right, using the standard language. Building that loyalty, Source 32, is also framed as a strategic investment, I assume.
Absolutely. A new loyalty program isn't just about giving points. The features are specific. Things like personalized rewards driven by data, maybe gamification elements to increase engagement, and the expected return from the investment, say $1.5 million for the program launch, isn't just happier customers. It's a quantifiable business target.
Yeah.
Achieve a 25% increase in customer lifetime value.
25% increase in CLV.
Okay.
Finally, let's touch on brand and sustainability.
These seem increasingly mandatory in high-level corporate dialogues. Source 29 talks about brand repositioning. How do they frame that challenge?
They address the perception challenge head on. Maybe the brand is perceived as traditional or outdated. The proposed solution is then anchored in a new identity, perhaps positioning the brand as tech-forward and sustainable. And the communication method is specified using digital-first storytelling.
And that sustainable positioning needs concrete proof, right? Which leads us to sustainability goals, Source 13. Exactly. The commitments here have to be ambitious and highly specific to be credible. We're talking goals like transitioning to 100% renewable energy by 2025, or achieving zero waste in manufacturing within 18 months. The initial capital investment might be significant, yes, but the justification is framed around long-term operational efficiency gains, risk reduction, and meeting growing stakeholder and customer demand for environmental responsibility.
And even corporate social responsibility, CSR, Source 24, that gets quantified too.
Increasingly, yes. The dialogue focuses on specific social impact areas like education or environmental conservation. But crucially, the expected brand benefit, the return on this social investment, is actually calculated. Maybe internal studies or external data suggest this initiative could boost brand trust by 40%. And this initiative requires a defined investment, perhaps $2 million annually. It really underscores the point we've seen throughout. Even initiatives focused on social good often need to be treated and spoken about as budgeted, measurable corporate functions to gain traction and approval. Hashtag tag outro.
So after digging through all 32 of these professional dialogues, what's the big takeaway? What does this really teach you, our listener, about mastering business communication? Well, the synthesis seems pretty undeniable, doesn't it? Professional conversation, it's just not casual chat. It is ruthlessly structured. It's perpetually driven by quantifiable data, hard numbers, and it's focused relentlessly on measurable outcomes and clearly defined risk mitigation.
Yeah, and I think this analysis really shows that mastering business English, or maybe more accurately, mastering corporate English, means mastering the specific Q&A sequences required for each distinct corporate situation. You now know, for example, that a project kickoff absolutely demands specific time constraints, like that 12-week rollout and measurable ROI from the get-go.
Right, whereas a crisis conversation demands something totally different. Immediate, quantified impact assessment. Facts, numbers, containment actions, absolutely no speculation.
Exactly. And a negotiation requires that careful diplomatic language, but also the ability to offer specific financial flexibility, maybe like that milestone-based payment plan, to actually move the deal forward. Each situation has its script, its expected language.
And one thing that really stood out, maybe the underlying theme, is the visibility these sources give us into the actual cost of strategy. For pretty much every major corporate goal we discussed, whether it was boosting efficiency by 40% or grabbing global market share or hitting sustainability targets, there was an explicitly stated corresponding investment cost attached.
That's right. We saw the $2.5 million needed for that digital transformation, the $1.2 million allocated for those R&D prototypes, the $3.5 million required for that comprehensive risk mitigation package. Every move had a price tag.
Which leads us, I think, to the final, maybe provocative thought for you, the listener. The ultimate challenge, perhaps, in the modern professional environment. If every single successful strategic move seems to require this level of quantified investment and resource allocation, if the true language of business really is the language of the budget, then what happens to the strategy or the initiative or maybe the part of your professional focus right now that you're struggling to quantify?
That's a tough question.
What element of your current work, your goals, are you finding it difficult to assign a hard metric to, a specific ROI, a budgeted cost? Because the ultimate test in corporate communication, as these dialogues show, might just be forcing the conversation away from vague hopes and aspirations towards that kind of hard, quantified accountability. Something to think about.
Definitely something to think about.
Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the blueprint of professional dialogue.
Until next time. We're talking actual high-level corporate dialogues.
That's right. Over 30 different scenarios covering basically everything you can think of in business, from kicking off a project right through to M&A talks, even crisis management.
It's quite a collection. And it really gives you a peek behind the curtain, doesn't it?
It does, but what's really valuable here isn't just what they're discussing. I mean, the topics are varied. It's how they're discussing it, the language, the structure.
Exactly. That's our mission today. We want to dig into these conversations and pull out the specific ways these professionals talk, how they sound informed, structured, in control.
It's about finding that blueprint, the consistent patterns they use.
Yeah, a blueprint for speaking like a professional. Because if there's one big takeaway from looking across all these dialogues, it seems to be that structure. Well, structure reduces perceived risk. Okay, let's unpack this.
That's absolutely it. That structure is like their secret weapon. It doesn't really matter if it's finance, HR, or, a big system failure hitting the fan.
Right.
The top people, they lead with how they frame things, they use data, they talk in measurable terms, they kind of replace that emotional uncertainty we all feel with these predictable communication patterns.
Okay, so let's start right at the beginning then. Kicking off and controlling the narrative. How do these sources show us the best way to start a conversation and, take charge from the get-go?
Well, look at the project initiation dialogue. That's source one. The opening is super precise. I'd like to kick off today's meeting by discussing our Q4 objectives.
No messing around there. It signals straight away, okay, serious discussion time. Here's the agenda.
Exactly. And the response, it immediately mirrors that structure. Something like, certainly, I've prepared a detailed presentation outlining our key milestones.
So they're not just saying, I'm ready. They're saying, I'm ready, and here's how I've defined success.
Milestones. That's critical, isn't it? The professional doesn't just ask for info. They ask for structure. The follow-up question is revealing. Could you walk us through the timeline for implementation?
Right. They're dictating the format of the answer, keeping control of the flow.
Precisely.
But what about, say, a performance review? Source 3 has an example opening with, I've reviewed your annual performance metrics, and I'm quite impressed. Is there a risk that sounds a bit cold, just focusing on data?
That's a fair question, but I think in that specific high-level corporate context, the data is actually the foundation of trust. It confirms the feedback is objective, evidence-based.
How do you make that?
And look how the employee responds. They link their effort back to the numbers. Thank you, I've worked hard to exceed our departmental targets. They're connecting their personal effort to those measurable outcomes.
Okay, so structure even works in potentially sensitive conversations. What about high-stakes stuff like that crisis management call in Source 4? The opening is very direct. I've called this emergency meeting regarding the system outage. Demands data immediately.
Yeah, and the response, even under huge pressure, it's all about framing the situation with data to limit the damage, psychologically at least. They start with facts. I have the incident report ready, then pivot to recovery. We've restored 80% functionality, but some issues persist. That 80% figure, it's clever. It puts a number, a boundary around the chaos. Suddenly, it's not total failure, it's progress towards a fix.
That shifts the focus. Okay, that brings us neatly into the whole idea of the metrics mindset, doesn't it? Yeah. Quantifying success and managing risk. Once you've framed the talk, you need to back it up. You can't really back things up without numbers.
Absolutely. Professionals swap vague words like good or better for precise metrics. Look at the marketing strategy review, Source 7. They didn't just say, yeah, it went well.
They were specific.
Right. They exceeded expectations with a 175% increase in user interaction, and they calculated the influencer ROI as a 3.2x return.
And just to clarify for listeners, that 3.2x return means for every dollar they spent on influencers, they brought back $3.20. That shows they're really tracking things closely.
It demonstrates rigor, and you see this across departments. Financial planning, Source 20, they're not just hopeful, they're projecting 15% annual growth.
Not around 15 or double digits, exactly 15%.
Precisely. And aiming for gross margins of 45% by year 3. That specificity builds confidence. It sounds like they've done their homework.
And the same applies to risk. Right. Back in the project kickoff, Source 1, when asked about risks, the answer wasn't just, oh, we'll figure it out.
No way. It was structured. We conducted a thorough risk assessment and included contingency plans, again, process and planning.
And the language gets technical too. In Source 27, discussing security, they're talking about mitigating risks using blockchain tracking and enhanced encryption.
You have to use that kind of specific vocabulary. If you're talking to people who understand it, it signals you're credible, you know the landscape.
We also saw this quantification in discussing efficiency gains. Digital transformation, Source 6, is a great example. It's not just things will be faster.
It's quantified, a projected 45% reduction in processing time and 30% cost savings. Concrete numbers.
And the supply chain one, Source 8, that's almost a template for pitching a change, isn't it?
It really is. They project they can reduce costs by 22% within the first year and cut delivery time by 40%. The lesson here for anyone listening is always connect your proposal to a quantified outcome, a percentage, a time saving, a dollar figure.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Moving into strategic planning and implementation language. When these folks are talking about huge, long-term strategic projects, M&A, big R&D pushes, global expansion, how do they keep it sounding manageable?
Well, they define everything very explicitly. The scope, the challenges, the timeline, no fuzzy thinking allowed. Look at the M&A dialogue, Source 15. They don't shy away from the difficulties.
Right, they state them up front.
Yeah. Cultural alignment and tech stack compatibility are key concerns. They frame potential risks as things that need planning for.
And then they immediately put a timeline on it to kind of manage the anxiety around those risks. We estimate 12 to 18 months for complete integration.
That timeline precision pops up again and again. Source 6 talks about a phased approach over 18 months. Source 9, the R&D one, aims for a working prototype within 8 months.
So the takeaway is anchor your project in time. Use months, quarters, specific milestones. Don't leave it vague.
Definitely. And when it comes to asking for resources, the ask is always concrete. In R&D Source 9, it's not, we need some people and money.
No, it was specific again.
It's, we'll need a specialized team and approximately $1.2 million in funding. Clear request.
And linked to the return, presumably.
Always. Same with global expansion in Source 17. First, define the strategy, starting with strategic local partnerships. Second, state the cost, $20 million for the first phase. The request is tied directly to how they plan to do it.
And after all that planning detail, they're careful about closing the loop, setting up accountability. Back in Source 1, the closing lines are all about action.
Yeah, things like, excellent, let's circulate the meeting notes by end of day, and crucially, I'll handle that and include action items for all stakeholders.
Assigning responsibility.
Exactly. The meeting isn't really over until the next steps and who owns them are clear. And you see it in change management too, Source 31. They plan how to track progress later using employee engagement scores and productivity indicators. The language ensures the conversation and the accountability continues after everyone leaves the room.
Okay, let's shift gears slightly now to communication in the HR and people sphere. This can often feel like a softer area, maybe harder to apply that really rigid professional structure to. How did the sources handle that?
Well, what's interesting is how they translate those human concerns into essentially operational objectives. Take the remote policy discussion, Source 10. Employee feedback isn't just feelings.
It's framed differently.
Yes, it's framed as formal organizational needs. Employees are seeking more flexibility and better work-life integration. It becomes a business requirement.
And the solutions are then structured business policies, not just, vague promises.
Right. They propose things like implement performance metrics and regular check-ins. They're measuring performance, not just presence. And even the support offered is specific. Digital literacy and remote management workshops. Structured support.
Makes sense. What about recruiting? Talent acquisition, Source 26.
The vocabulary there has to be specialized, professional. They talk about sourcing candidates through AI-powered platforms and specialized headhunters. It shows a strategic approach.
And the offer isn't just a good salary. It's phrased as top quartile compensation plus equity.
And for anyone unfamiliar, top quartile means in the top 25% compared to similar roles at competitors, plus equity, actual ownership stakes. It aligns employee and company success.
So it's a very precise package, and retention isn't just hoping people stay.
No, it's framed as a structural program, a comprehensive onboarding and mentoring program. It's planned. Even wellness initiatives, Source 19, are formalized. Well, they list the components. mental health support, fitness programs, and work-life balance coaching. And critically, they justify it with data.
Yeah.
Similar programs show 20% improvement in employee engagement. Even caring initiatives have a business case built with metrics.
Wow. So the structure holds even there. What's fascinating here is the amount of preparation this all implies.
Yeah.
You mentioned specialized vocabulary earlier, things like zero trust architecture or milestone-based payment plan. You can't just pull those out of thin air credibly, can you?
Absolutely not. And that's really the core lesson, I think. Professional business English, the kind we see in these high-level dialogues, it relies on a predictable structure. It ensures all the critical information gets covered.
Right.
Across all these different scenarios, funding, expansion, HR policies, the speaker, consciously or not, is usually answering a kind of four-part checklist. What are we doing? How are we doing it? When is the timeline? And what are the costs or metrics involved?
The what, how, when, and metrics. That structure seems to be the formula for projecting confidence and control.
It is. What are the goals? How will we achieve them? When will it happen? What's the investment? And what's the expected gain or ROI?
And supporting that structure, as you said, is the technical vocabulary. We heard NPS scores, Net Promoter Score for customer loyalty, supply chain disruption, zero trust architecture. Mastering that specific language seems crucial for credibility.
It's the final piece of the puzzle. It shows you're not just following a script, you actually understand the domain you're operating in.
So what does this all mean for you listening? Well, it means there's a repeatable framework here, a structure you can adapt and apply to pretty much any important conversation you need to have, whatever your field.
And maybe the most telling insight from all these sources is how the best professionals handle the unexpected, the volatility. Even in that full-blown crisis, the system outage in Source 4, what was the immediate focus?
Process and communication strategy.
Exactly. Defining how they would communicate what to tell clients, the press, their own employees before they even had all the answers. They controlled the narrative first.
That preparation, that structure seems to be the key difference between simply reacting to events and actually leading through them.
Yeah.
Which brings us to a final, maybe provocative thought for you to consider. How often do you consciously step back and plan your communication strategy, really define your what, how, when, and metrics before you have to deliver a critical message? Whether that's bad news, a big ask, or even a breakthrough idea. How much planning goes into the communication itself before you talk to your key stakeholders?